Looking back on the week that was and forward to the week ahead. It's the Fantasy Football Hustle. Here are your hosts, Brian Drake and Dwain McFarland.
All across the fantasy universe, I know you're sweating your asses off out there because it's 100 degrees everywhere in the United States. Welcome in. It's the Fantasy Football presented by Pro Football Focus. I'm your host, Brian Drake, fightingchancefantasy.com. You can find me on Twitter at DrakeFantasy. You know him, you love him. It's my co-host, the analytical assassin, Dwain McFarland of Pro Football Focus and Established to Run. You find him at Dwain McFarland on Twitter. What's up, brother? How hot is it down in Texas?
I don't even know. It's too hot to go outside, Drake. My wife was out there earlier, like digging up weeds and stuff. I'm like, what are you doing? It's like, 105 degrees, but we've mostly had the kids doing that. So I saw her out there. I guess she just had wild hair. Yeah.
So yeah. It's too hot. I'm staying inside and doing some research here. Kids, get your asses outside.
Exactly.
Pull some weeds for dad.
I help on the weekends. We usually do the yard work together, like as a family. It's kind of therapeutic for me. You got to get some sun, Drake. With all this work from home, being inside, you don't get the windshield time, driving on the road, at least get the sun hitting you. You know how it goes. Like you can be in an office all day. It gets old.
For a living, I drive all over the place. And I have I don't know if you can see it here on YouTube. I have the sickest, just like driving tan on my forearm here. So if you want a good farmer's tan, I can show it to you.
There's a band from Fort Worth called Left Arm Tan. So basically, like, because think like a country dude driving out, in the middle of nowhere, he's got his arm hanging out, left arm's hanging out the window, so just got a left arm tan. I thought it was pretty good. Totally it's a pretty good band name.
I'm looking them up on YouTube afterwards, and we thank all the fans who are checking us out on YouTube and you're hanging out with us in the chat room. Go to YouTube, check out Fantasy Football Hustle, get ready for your fantasy football season, and there's no better place to start doing that than over at PFF.com. And right now you can use our promo code HUSTLE for 25% off any PFF subscription and access to all of PFF's fantasy football rankings, the locked articles, the data you can't get anywhere else. Just use that promo code HUSTLE, 25% off. And check this out. This just dropped this week, guys. I know you're sick of me reading the same thing, so we're switching it up. The PFF College Football Preview Magazine is out June 28th. It's 600 plus pages of analysis. If you're living down south where Dwain is, I know you're big into college football. It's a religion down there. You care more about that than you do your kids. So check it out. 130 teams, strength of schedule, win projections, all kinds of crazy stuff. PFF.com, promo code HUSTLE. You a big college football guy, Dwain?
Man, I used to be, Drake. I'll be honest. I don't have the time to watch it all the time anymore. You know how it goes. Once you have, the kids and you got work going, you got everything else, you slowly start to weed out like how many different, things can I be consumed by sports wise. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it's like I used to watch baseball, hockey, basketball, everything. Football was always my favorite, so like NFL football has always stuck with me, but slowly over the years, it's like they've just fallen off one by one. Now it's like I'll pay attention to the local teams when they're doing well. Mm-hmm. Like if you go to the playoffs or whatever, like I'll definitely watch and I just kind of read about them to keep up. But used to, I'd watch all the games, and I just can't keep up with it all anymore, man.
Mm-hmm. Colin Cowherd had a great take on that years ago, and he said, as you get older and you get into your 40s, you have a wife and kids, you start pruning your sports tree. And I kind of listened. I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm always going to be up watching the 10:30, West Coast game of the NBA or baseball or whatever it is. And I'm going to follow all the top 25 teams. If you guys see on YouTube here, I've got this big Syracuse logo behind me. I couldn't tell you 5 guys on the Syracuse football team. I mean, by the way, they're awful, but I just don't have time anymore. I'm just so focused now on how can we do great content for the hustle? What can I feed to Dwain for him to knock out of the ballpark? And I think we got a good one tonight because what we're going to do is called Emptying Dwain's. Yeah, there we go. What do you got this week?
Oh, dude. Well, somebody tweeted about the high noon, so I just stuck with it.
Nice.
So maybe it's a theme now, Drake.
We got to get a sponsorship. I'm going to work on that.
It's gluten-free. I'm allergic to gluten. So, hey, it just keeps me more clear-headed than beer. It's all about the listener, Drake.
I didn't know that. What is that, celiac disease?
No, I don't have that. It doesn't bother like my stomach. It just like if I eat too much bread or have too much beer, like it can just make me tired kind of thing.
Yeah.
Kind of get like brain fog if like if I go eat like at a Mexican food restaurant and have like 4 or 5 tortillas, like, oh yeah, like I'm going to need a nap.
Oh man. You know what I'm getting tired of is all this Jonathan Taylor talk. You and I were texting earlier today. Again, as I'm driving around, literally eating Burger King with one hand, driving with the knee, texting you. And one thing that we came up was, you had a great point. How different is Jonathan Taylor than David Montgomery? And I kind of had to think about that for a second. And I figured maybe you're just following me on Twitter and you saw my excellent David Montgomery tweet now that I have access to PFF's ultimate data. But let me read you what I wrote. And then
You're not going to need me anymore. You're not going to need me anymore, Drake. You got access to all this data now. I'm just going to one day be sitting here waiting on my invite to the show and it doesn't come. And I'm just going to see you go live. And you're going to like be jumping back and forth from each seat, just talking to yourself. You'll have like some different, like a different hat. You'll just turn your hat around, one way and then you go back to anyway, sorry.
If we can ever get that animation going, that's where the show's headed. But
exactly.
So I wrote this. David Montgomery finished as PPR running back 4 last year. All that said, Chicago was below average in rushing attempts, rushing yards, rushing touchdowns, first downs gained rushing, yards before contact, rushes gaining 10 plus yards. So basically what this was weeks 1 and 2, when Tariq Cohen was healthy, he played 13 and 15 passing snaps. Cohen gets hurt week 3. What do you know? He's got 7 games where he sees 30 plus snaps out of the field when they're throwing the football. So I'd love to hear your take now. It's Jonathan Taylor who's going off the board. His ADP is, let's see. ADP from Underdog is 7th overall. Montgomery's a 4th rounder. He's RB 20. So the floor is yours, my friend. What's the difference between these two?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we like Jonathan Taylor a lot better, right, as a player. But like the disparity between the two guys is really huge. I mean, you're talking about a first-round pick, sometimes top half of the first-round pick, to an early to mid 4th round pick. And I've even seen David Montgomery slip past that sometimes. It's like the hate is real, right? And last year, Montgomery was a guy that everybody was off of. The year before, people were too high on him, and we were telling people tap the brakes. But last year, before he got hurt in the preseason, we're like, hey, he's a good target, in the 4th, 5th round. And then he slipped into the 6th, 7th, and 8th rounds because you had an injury discount. And so, we were advising folks to buy in. We were telling folks on Jonathan Taylor, he's not worth a 3rd round pick. If he slips into the 4th and you want the upside and you're going for certain roster construction, go for it. And by the way, most people that drafted Jonathan Taylor, you struggled to make it into your playoffs because he didn't do anything until the end of the season. But Jonathan Taylor is clearly the better running back. Like, I get that. So I give him that. Jonathan Taylor has a better offensive line, no doubt, right? The Bears' offensive line is kind of scary. So I get that. So those two things are great. But at the end of the day, what is the number one thing that fantasy football is about, Drake?
Usage
and volume, right? These guys have almost the same exact usage profile or utilization profile, right? So David Montgomery, why is he falling to the 4th round? Everybody looks at it. Oh, well, he trashed these bad defenses at the end of the year and Tariq Cohen was gone. You're right. So you should move David Montgomery down. Well, what was the deal with Jonathan Taylor? Jonathan Taylor did the same thing. He blew up at the end of the season against a bunch of really bad defenses. I did happen to have him on a team that I snuck into the championship round of the FFPC playoffs, and he helped me post a really good finish. Wish he would have helped me post a better finish, but they're the same. They both had the same thing going on. Now, Nyheim Hines was still obviously active, right, for the Colts, but we're talking about games where the Colts were able to build leads or keep things close, right? And they were able to lean into Taylor. My biggest point is this, right? They both have a passing game specialist that's going to be involved. David Montgomery's going to give up the 2-minute offense to Tariq Cohen. You already kind of hit on that earlier, right? So if you look at the utilization last year, you kind of gave the high level for folks. If you look at the utilization last year, in the 2-minute offense, Cohen handled 100%. They didn't run any 2-minute offense in game 2, and he ran 50% in game 3, but he got hurt that game, right? So he was basically handling all of that. So then David Montgomery was able to take over, some of that work, and that helped him. And so people are already onto that. But the thing with Jonathon Taylor is the same thing. You know how much of the 2-minute offense Jonathon Taylor handled all of last season?
Not much.
11%. You know how much of the 4-minute offense he handled, which means closing out games? Only 50%. They were giving that work to Jordan Wilkins, even late in the season. So now you get Marlon Mack back. Okay?
That's a big thing.
And look, I don't think Marlon Mack's going to be huge, but it's just enough to be a nuisance, Drake. Mm-hmm. Jordan Wilkins handled 18% of the rushing attempts last year. Why? I don't know, but Marlon Mack's better than Jordan Wilkins, right? So even if Mack just gets 10%, and then you got to give up the 2-minute work to Hines, what I'm saying is Jonathon Taylor is going to be game script dependent. If they get into shootouts, he's not going to be on the field as much. And we saw this early in the season. Remember, he was unstartable until the end of the season. I'm not saying that's going to be the case, but I just think people they're way too confident in Jonathon Taylor in a first-round grade. And I get it. The talent is there. The offensive line is there. I love it. But for him to be a mid-first and for David Montgomery, despite the talent differences, despite the offensive lines, to be that far apart, I think that's just kind of funny because people actually have the right logic around David Montgomery and they have the wrong logic around Jonathon Taylor. Like, oh, Jonathon Taylor, he's just going to overcome it all. I'm just going to close my eyes and I'm just going to squint really hard and I'm just going to see what I want to see. But with David Montgomery, I'm really going to take in all the factors and all the information and I'm going to make a really good buying decision. Like they're the same. They're the same thing. And I'm not saying Jonathon Taylor should be a 4th-round pick. He should obviously go before David Montgomery. But, I mean, come on. Like, he shouldn't be going ahead of a lot of these other guys that are going to get far more volume than he is. And, look, do weird things happen? Could he all of a sudden just take over everything? Yes. Is it a high probability? No, because Nyheim Hines has a very special talent set that they're going to want to use. I mean, Nyheim Hines is just a matchup problem in the passing game. He's it's not to say Jonathon Taylor's bad in the passing game, but he's not Nyheim Hines. It's the same thing Montgomery's dealing with. You got a very special player in Cohen. I could argue that Montgomery has a clearer path to just taking over the full role because Cohen in the early games last year sucked. And the year before, he sucked. The year before that, he was good. So really, Cohen, the last year and 3 games we've seen of him, he hasn't been the player that he once was. He's actually regressed. So Montgomery did well out of the backfield, last year. So I just think the guys they're too far apart, Drake. And I think people are thinking the right way around Montgomery, and they're just closing their eyes on Jonathon Taylor. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Let me ask this, because here's something that people are going to debate in their drafts. So you could get Jonathon Taylor coming off the board, underdog ADP of RB7. Coming off right after him, Cam Akers. Coming off after him, now we're into the 2nd round, is Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones, who finished with more fantasy points per game than David Montgomery and Jonathon Taylor. He finished as PPR running back 5. Again, he only played 14 games versus 15 for the other 2 guys. Wouldn't you rather have Aaron Jones, who's going to be the passing down back, which we believe Aaron Rodgers, if he's there, wouldn't you much rather have Aaron Jones than maybe either of those 2 guys?
Yeah, and it's the same thing, right? It's the same thing again. People are pushing Aaron Jones down the board because they know that he has to share time. But Aaron Jones has a better chance of taking over the 2-minute work on his team than Jonathon Taylor does. Worst case scenario, Aaron Jones stays equal to the same kind of role Jonathon Taylor does if for some reason A.J. Dillon picks up all of Jamal Williams' work. I just don't see it happening. Jamal Williams, he had a skill set that allowed him to stay on the field and long down and distance. He also took most of the 2-minute work. I don't see A.J. Dillon handling the 2-minute work. Maybe he can take over the long down and distance because typically you're blocking in that situation because the quarterback wants to throw it downfield. I do know that the other thing getting baked in with Aaron Jones, and I do understand, is people are scared, right? That, what's going to happen if Aaron Rodgers, doesn't play? That's going to hurt things, especially from a touchdown standpoint, for Aaron Jones. It's not going to hurt him as bad from just a pure rushing perspective. It's still going to be a really good scheme. But again, to your point, it's like Jonathon Taylor is worth a mid-first, but Aaron Jones is not. And the only reason is because people look at it through the lens of, man, Jonathon Taylor destroyed it down the stretch. Go look at the game scripts. Go look at how many plays they were leading versus close versus trailing. And then dig deeper and look, did he have the long down and distance roll? Nope, only had half of it. Did he have the 2-minute roll when they needed to use it? Nope. Naheem Hines had all of it. So, like, you just got to dig, another layer. But to your point, yeah, like, I'm more excited about Aaron Jones. I would stick with Jonathan Taylor until I know for sure, right, that Aaron Rodgers is, going to play there. But right now, I'm getting Aaron Jones as much as I can because the fact of the matter is, like, he sometimes falls to the end of the second. So, like, as soon as Aaron Rodgers signs, he's going to turn into an early second. Like, so now's the time to buy if you are going to buy Aaron Jones. As far as Cam Akers goes, that's a total different situation, man. Cam Akers fully took over his backfield. Like he just took over. So for me, I think Cam Akers is the back I would rather own than Jonathan Taylor. And again, it goes back to usage and just how comfortable I feel with what I think that situation is going to be. And I'm much more comfortable with what I think is going to occur with Cam Akers than what I think is going to happen with, Jonathan Taylor.
We actually had a question from the one female listener we have. So thank you, Shirley Shapiro, watching on YouTube. She asks, fellas, who should go ahead of Jonathan Taylor that is not? Examples, Gibson, Mixon, Chubb. So let's look at who's going after him in best ball ADP. So who should go ahead? I mean, we just talked about Aaron Jones, Cam Akers, Austin Eckler, Joe Mixon, Nick Chubb, Antonio Gibson, Najee Harris. You taking any of those guys before you're taking Jonathan Taylor, Dwain?
Yeah, especially in a PPR or a half point PPR. Name all those guys and I'll just say yes or no. Name them one at a time.
Cam Akers.
Yes.
Aaron Jones.
And that means I'm taking Akers over him. Aaron Jones, that's the one that you could put him on a close playing field. I think they could be similar in utilization, and we know more about the Colts offense right now. So fine if you want to take Taylor.
Austin Eckler.
Taking Eckler.
We're going to get into this guy later, but Joe Mixon.
Definitely taking Joe Mixon.
Nick Chubb.
See, now you're getting to the point where if you really wanted to squint and see a really good scenario for Jonathan Taylor, what people should be looking at is Nick Chubb, right? Chubb has a better back with him and Kareem Hunt, but he doesn't have to deal with two other backs. So it's going to roughly work out, right, the same. You could make an argument that Chubb's true ceiling as far as touches is a little more capped because is it more likely that Taylor totally eliminates Marlon Mack, right, and potentially Jordan Wilkins, any kind of role they have? I would say yes, that's more likely than Chubb completely eliminating Hunt's role. So, but that's where you're starting to get into the spot where I would take Jonathan Taylor over Nick Chubb just based on the slight chance that he has of truly taking over his backfield, having a higher percentage chance of that versus what I would say for Chubb. But really, now you're talking about the tier he should be in. That's where he should be. He's really talented runners. He's got a really good offensive line. Same thing you got going on in Cleveland. I would argue that Cleveland's got a better scheme for running backs. But I think now you're in the sweet spot, Drake, of where you start talking about it. But Najee Harris, I'm taking over him because I'm a believer that Najee Harris is going to be an every down back.
There we go. Well, Dwain, as you guys all know, is a projections guy. So what we like to do is go through his projections, and it helps us get talking points for all the fantasy relevant guys on our team. So that's what we're going to do as we said, empty the notebook here, and we're going to stick with Chicago. And Bears second-year wide receiver Darnell Mooney is getting crazy hype this offseason. If you're on fantasy Twitter, it's all you're seeing is people hyping Darnell Mooney. Last year, he caught 61 of his 98 targets for 631 yards and 4 touchdowns. Now, remember, that was from Mitch and Nick Foles. Now, he saw 5 or more targets in 12 games last year, though he only caught 5 or more balls in 5 of those games. So he never had a game over 70 yards receiving until week 17. He finished as wide receiver 50 last year in a PPR. His underdog ADP right now, coincidentally, wide receiver 49. He's a 9th or 10th round pick. Where do you have him projected? What's the upside? And, forget Andy Dalton. Enough of him. He's going to play half of week 1. This is Justin Fields we're talking about. What is the ceiling here for Darnell Mooney? And is 9th or 10th round appropriate, or are we a little too low on the kid?
Yeah, I think 9th or 10th round. I'm not taking him in the 9th. I'm personally looking at him, 10th, 11th, 12th round. There's a lot of receivers I like in that range. his targets went from 14% per game over the first 8 games to 18% over the last 8 games. So that's nice. 41% of his targets came on play action. So the Bears use a lot of play action. So, if you listen to the hustle, a play action target is worth more than a non-play action target. So he's got a lot of good things going for him. But what I'm seeing with the Bears, Drake, I'm with you. So the way I projected the team, right now, this is where I'm sitting. I've got 13 games going to Justin Fields, and I've got Andy Dalton with 4. Right now that we've got this beautiful 17-game season going on. So 77%, of the work I've got going to Justin Fields. I've got 33% of the work going to Andy Dalton. And I think what's going to occur, so this has been a very pass-heavy team over the last couple of years. So if you look at it, it's been, you're talking about Matt Nagy, really comes from that Andy Reid style of offense. So if you look at, the way that the scheme has been ran now schematically, like Nagy doesn't do enough stuff to help his players the way that Andy Reid does. But just from a split standpoint of the way they think about splitting up the run and the pass, it's been 65-35 basically over the last couple of years. But I think what's going to happen, once Fields takes over, and thinking Fields takes over, like I said, after 3 games, I think it's going to bump down to about 60% pass and 40% run. And so when I say pass, just so people know, that means they drop back to pass. Then you got to take out sacks, then you got to take out scrambles, right? And then you actually have throws, or attempts. And a lot of those are throwaways, right, or spikes. So then I take those out to actually get down to what I think are going to be targeted, right, at receivers. And sometimes, receivers being open and throwaways, they're tied together. But sometimes, quarterbacks, some quarterbacks are more conservative than others. But the bottom line I'm trying to make is that I see this team shifting to a little bit more of a run heavy scenario, Drake, because I think they're just going to want to use Justin Fields' legs. So, I mean, for example, like when I look at Justin Fields taking over for 13 games, if you look last year, say, for example, at Kyler Murray, he handled a design rushing play, meaning he didn't scramble. It was designed for him to run on 17.5% of the plays. If you look at Lamar Jackson, it was like 23%. If you look at Josh Allen, it was somewhere right in the 15-16% range. I don't have his written down in front of me. But I think with Justin Fields taking over, after 3 or 4 games, you're probably looking at like 13-14%, right, of the rushing plays going through Justin Fields. And I think David Montgomery is still going to get his work. So I think, and when I look at the offense, like, do their receivers do you just think they're amazing? I think they're okay, right? I think Allen Robinson's a really good player. I think Darnell Mooney could be a nice piece. I'm not super excited about him. I think Cole Kmet could do some nice things, but really we have unknowns, right? I think if you look at the strength of the team, it could be using Justin Fields' legs. It could be using David Montgomery more. It could be using the backside of the backfield in the passing game more. So I bumped the Bears down from a 65-35 split pass to run to a 60-40 in my projections. And so what that means, for, a guy like Darnell Mooney, even though I think he may get a higher percentage of targets, which I split the difference. Basically, I put him right at 16% for now. I've got them running, from a percentage standpoint, less, passing plays than they did last year. So he basically comes out about the same. Now, this is on a 17-game season, but I've got him at 150 points. In a PPR, I've got him at 100, which adjusted for 16 games. So people are used to thinking 16 games, like it's throwing my mind for a loop for sure. Like that would have been 141 points, right? So, but in 17 games, I've got him at 60 receptions, 680 yards, and 4 receiving touchdowns. Now, again, there's a range of outcomes. That's me basically plotting the middle. So I think his upside is, he gets up towards 18-19%, but you see some really big plays break loose. So I've got him at 11.5%, yards per catch right now. And mostly that's because his ADOT's not really about being super deep. He does get some deep shots, but they use him around the line of the scrimmage. They use him in screens and different things like that. So they move him around a little bit. But if all of a sudden he breaks off a few big plays, and his yards per catch jumps up to, 13, 14, or they start to use him more that way, if they go heavier on the run and start using play action even more, well, that's where I think you unlock his upside. I don't think Mooney's upside is going to be unlocked by all of a sudden becoming like a 22, 24% like target monster. I think it's going to have to come through efficiency. I think Allen Robinson will be the clear number one. I think then you'll have Mooney, then you'll have Cole Kmet, and then you'll have Tariq Cohen, then you'll have David Montgomery. Like, that's my pecking order. Then you got Anthony Miller.
I'm playing with all these new tools that I've opened up here with PFF, Dwayne.
And don't crash your internet.
Yeah, seriously. Pornhub's going slow. So I'm looking at the Bears here because I want to look at Allen Robinson, who finished yet again with terrible quarterback play as a top 10 PPR wide receiver. And according to their quarterback accuracy percentage on QB throws, the Bears were 28th in the league. So they were terrible. And we know that. The only teams worse than them, the 49ers, who had God knows who playing beat hard, was playing quarterback for them. The Broncos with Drew Lock, and my beloved Eagles, who somehow were worse in the league. That has to be an error. I will run that up the flagpole to PFF. Chris Collinsworth, expect a call. That can't be right. But he's got to improve, you'd think. I mean, he's 9th in PPR points at wide receiver, and the ball's skipping rocks in a lake. Like, they're nowhere near him. I'm excited for Allen Robinson this year. What do you have him projected for?
Yeah, what's amazing, about a guy like Allen Robinson is that he still, despite all that, he continues to post, catch rates, right, in the high 60s. Now, his ADOT's not super high, so with a really accurate quarterback, right, in the intermediate to short game, he might be up, around 71, 72% catch rate. But because he is dealing with quarterbacks that have issues, that's a problem. So I think the issue I have here, Drake, is we still have unknowns, right? So I didn't adjust Allen Robinson's catch rate up. I kept it, I expect him to play a similar role. I expect him to get 25% of the targets. That's 142 over 17 games, 98 receptions, 1,228 yards. I've got him at 6 touchdowns, so that's 260, points. Like, it's a solid receiver. And don't get me wrong, like, Allen Robinson, like, if Justin Fields does all of a sudden come to play, right? Because we know Andy Dalton's not. But if Justin Fields, like, comes out and does some of the things we've seen some rookie quarterbacks do over recent years and is just good enough to make the defense have to respect other aspects of the game, and that could honestly be the bigger key, Drake, is that versus just his accuracy necessarily needing to be better, because that just opens up more parts of the field, right? The other part is if Darnell Mooney can be enough of a threat, right, to really make defenses have to worry about him. And then if Cole Kmet can do the same thing, remember, we've talked about on the show multiple times for years, right? It's if you talk to, NFL coaches, and this is based on talking to certain NFL consultants, like, they call it the rule of 3, right? You need 3 good passing weapons to truly threaten defenses on a week in, week out basis, right? And to be able to break down different kinds of schemes and break down what defenses are strong at. So right now, when I look at the Bears, it's like, maybe they have 2 weapons when I combine Allen Robinson and Mooney and Kmet together. But if all of a sudden you start using Fields as a weapon that the defense has to respect, they ran quite a bit of RPO actually last year. You switch that out from being Trubisky to Fields now, and you have to worry more about his legs. Now, all of a sudden, that's kind of the tide that rises all ships, right? Cole Kmet all of a sudden is a little more dangerous. Darnell Mooney all of a sudden pops a big play. Now you got to worry about that. Now, Allen Robinson isn't facing as tough a coverage, as he does basically week in, week out. He's getting, if a defense is, bracketing or moving, players around, like, he's getting the most attention in the way defenses are being designed by far. Like, if a team is playing the Bears, what do they got to do? They're like, the number one thing we have to do is stop Allen Robinson. Don't let him run the ball. Right. So that's going to probably be the same thing going into week 1. So they need to make defenses have to consider more things. And I think that's the key to Robinson having greater upside, because then all of a sudden, you move from like a 12 yards per catch to all of a sudden, if Robinson can jump up to a 13, 14 yards per catch, I don't see his catches going a lot higher, right? But if I do that and all of a sudden his receiving yards jump to 1375, say his 6 touchdowns turn into 8 or 9, now you're talking about a receiver that could be, in the top 6. But right now, you're just dealing with a guy that we've just got too many unknowns around the quarterback and what they're going to do with the scheme.
Those are guys, Mooney, Robinson, Fields, you get excited about when you go up and you slap that sticker on the draft board when you're hanging out with your buddies, you're at a bar, you're in the backyard or whatever. And we're so happy that it's going to be live draft season again. You're going to get to go hang out, somewhere, drink a few cold ones. Maybe it's a high noon like Dwain's sipping on right now, or an IPA like mine. But you're going to do it with our friends with Draft with Red Zone, because we got a kick-ass draft package for you, folks. Jump on it now. I'm telling you, the price goes up in July. If you're listening to this in June, you got a couple days left. $59. But wait, scratch that. Use our code FFHustle. You're going to get it for $54. I'll save you $5 right off the top. Use the code FFHustle. We're going to get you a draft board. We're going to get you all the stickers. We're going to get you a last place sign to put over the guy who sucked last year. They're going to give you a cheat sheet. They're going to give you a wall putty and draft order stickers. But here's the real cool part from our buddies at draftwithredzone.com. They're going to give you a championship ring in a case that you can give to the winner of your league. It's awesome. They're sending one to me. I'm going to have it on next week's show, Dwain, and we'll be able to show it off. But I can't stress this enough, guys. Have some fun. Get back with your buddies. Fantasy football's back. Draftwithredzone.com. Use our code FFHustle. You'll be glad you did. And I'm going to be using that for my home draft this year because, number one, I'm cheap and I love getting things for free. And number two, I believe in the product. It's very good. So, yes, there you go. What else you got from the Bears? Any other projections stick out to you want to let people know about?
No, I think I hit on the main things, just what I think is going to happen when Fields takes over. Okay. I mean, I guess people probably want to know, where do I have David Montgomery? So I can walk through Montgomery's line real quick. I've got him at 60% of the attempts. And the main reason I have him going down is because I think Fields is going to take some, right? Mm-hmm. But even if you look at Montgomery last year, when Cohen left, Cordarrelle Patterson was still getting like 15% of the carries. So he basically took over Cohen's role as far as relieving Montgomery. And Montgomery still had like 65% of the attempts, right? And the year before, I want to say he might have been 67% last year. The year before, he was at like 65%. So, I mean, I see him being right around 60%. So I've got him at 288 carries, 1,150 yards, and I've got him at 9 rushing touchdowns. I've got him, this is where I've got him coming down, right? I've got him at 7% of the targets. That's 40 targets, 32 receptions, 255 yards receiving, and 1 receiving touchdown. The secret to upside for Montgomery is clearly, do they all of a sudden just move away from Cohen? And Cohen has not been effective, like I said. So I think there is a slight chance. And it's already priced. Basically, Montgomery, the price you're getting him at, I know before because I hadn't dug in as deep to some of these players. I know a couple of weeks ago, I think we were talking about a draft, and it's like, we're like, David Montgomery, do you really want to draft him? Like now looking at it, again, opportunity cost comes into play, but if he's sliding in a draft a little bit, depending on my roster construction, Drake, I mean, I'm not totally against taking him because I do think there is a better chance of him taking over the 2-minute offense on his team than there is of Jonathan Taylor on his team.
Oh, for sure. I like the little segue you gave there talking about, backs with multiple guys in the backfield, because that's where we're going to go next. We're going to talk about another emerging second-year back, this time in Baltimore, and it's J.K. Dobbins, who lives squarely on the corner of the running back dead zone in the middle of round 3. What helps him? He's talented. He's explosive. Mark Ingram's no longer there. But we all know where he gets screwed is Lamar Jackson's rush for 1,000 yards and 7 touchdowns in each of the last 2 seasons. Oh, by the way, Gus Edwards is still there. He's rushed for 700-plus yards in each of the last 3 seasons. And with Edwards, Dwain, we're not talking about like some scat back like Tariq Cohen. We're talking about a guy who took 144 carries last year and scored 6 touchdowns himself. So that's a meaningful role for Gus Edwards plus Lamar Jackson. So in a conversation you and I had before, you said, I will own none of J.K. Dobbins this year.
Yeah, just at his current price, I think it's too high. You're counting on a super efficient year. They just re-signed Gus Edwards, right, for 2 seasons for $10 million. I mean, they're going to use him. Greg Roman came out in minicamp and literally when asked about the running backs, he said, we're going to use all of them. That's a direct quote. Like it's a running back by committee. And guess what? He has specific roles for these players, right? He does rotate Dobbins and Edwards mostly as far as just, taking on attempts, between the 20s. Dobbins does get the work in the 2-minute offense. The problem is Lamar Jackson doesn't check the ball down very often. Now, they did say in minicamp the number one thing they've been working on is getting their backs more involved in the passing game. So maybe we'll see that change a little bit this year. They may also want to take a little bit off of Lamar's plate, Drake, just, kind of trying to protect him a little bit. So I think there's a potential, but I don't think you're going to see this huge jump, right? I don't think you're going to see it going from, right now I've got Dobbins, projected at 8% of the targets. I don't think we're going to see enough of a change where all of a sudden he's going to be 15%, right? It's just Lamar Jackson's so good at just taking off and knowing that he can do just as much damage, if not more, right, with his legs scrambling than dumping the ball off. Plus, right, you get an extra blocker on the field because then all of a sudden Dobbins or whoever the back is turns into a blocker for the person running. If Lamar Jackson passes it, he's not going to run downfield and block, right, for the back he just threw it to. So it's also a numbers game. So with Dobbins, yeah, it's going to be a struggle. Actually, when I projected him out, he came out a little higher than I thought he was going to, but that's just mostly because this is a very, very heavy rushing offense, right? I mean, if you look at what they've done, you may have it in front of you.
They ran for 3,165 yards last year. I mean, if Lamar runs for 1,000 of that, can't Dobbins get 1,400 of it? If they run for 3,000 again, I mean, there's pieces of the pie here for him, but I just worry that he's not going to catch the ball and he's going to get vultured to the goal line.
Yeah, I mean, it's the most run-heavy offense in the league, to go along with like Tennessee and some of these others. Now it does. You have Lamar Jackson, so that obviously, he's like having another running back. But I mean, their pass-to-run splits have been 51-49 and 52-48 over the last 2 seasons. Lamar Jackson scrambles 8 to 11%, right, of the time. So you add that on top. Those are actually being counted right now as part of the passes, right? So really, those end up being runs too. So. Yeah, when you look at it, it's just that's the kind of stuff that's going to be, problematic for Dobbins. I do think he's going to have some big games, but I'm just telling you right now, Gus Edwards is going to be involved, and they even asked about Justice Hill. So last year down the stretch, after Mark Ingram got hurt, there was, a positive development for Dobbins, right? And it's that before Ingram's injury, Dobbins averaged 36% of the snaps and only 11% of the attempts, Drake, in the first 5 games. With Mark Ingram, he was just not getting used in the running game. Then if you look at the games without Ingram on the field, he averaged 58% of the snaps. So you jumped up, from 36 to 58, and then you jumped up to 37% of the rushes, up from 11%. He also handled the majority of the 2-minute offense. He handled 88% of that on the season. So I do see him continuing to have that role. But late in the season, after he took over the additional work for for Mark Ingram, right, in the rushing attack, and then Gus Edwards took over a little bit more as well. Justice Hill took over the long down and distance role, and so I think that's what you're going to see this year. You're going to see J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards basically splitting work, except you're going to see J.K. Dobbins handle most of the work inside the 5. And he handled, a decent amount of that last year. And I think you're going to see him handle almost all of the 2-minute offense. And I think Justice Hill is going to be your long down and distance back. I don't think he's going to get many attempts at all. He's just going to be involved a little bit, in the passing game. So basically what you get is you can feel safe basically projecting the offense the way it looked in the games Mark Ingram was out. That's like the approach I took to this offense. It'd be one thing if Gus Edwards, if they didn't just re-sign him, for what they signed him for, and then Greg Roman immediately comes out and says it's going to be a running back by committee. Like he literally just basically shouted that from the top of his lungs. So I've got Dobbins at 35% of the attempts. I've got Edwards at 30%. I've got Justice Hill at 5%. Obviously, all the rest is going to Lamar Jackson. So I've got Dobbins right at 1,000 yards. I did give him 5 yards per carry, just because we've seen the Ravens offense produce that type of efficiency multiple times. But even if you drop it down, because it's very rare I give someone 5 yards per carry. Like typically I'm between 4 and 4.25. And I talk about that like in some of the writing I've done about how to do projections. There's just some rare exceptions. But even if you took it down to like 4.5, that's like 930 yards rushing. I've got him at 9 rushing touchdowns. Does he have upside from there? Yeah, but he also has downside. Like I wouldn't be surprised if J.K. Dobbins had 5 rushing touchdowns because we don't know what Lamar Jackson's going to do at any moment, right? He can call his own number and he can snipe those carries. And Gus Edwards does still stay involved some inside the 5, but Dobbins is the preferred option there. Then I've got him at 30 receptions on 37 targets, 200 yards receiving, and I've got him with 1 receiving touchdown. So in a 17-game season, that puts him at 200 PPR points. Adjusted, so if this were a 16-game season, just to give people context, that would have been 191. So, I mean, that's an RB. That can be an RB2. I think the issue you're going to have is you're going to have some boom bust as well, Drake. And I know, and it's not something that you have to be super worried about. It's like you want to start players that have high ceilings, even if they've got, some low floors, as long as you've got enough good players, like that all balances out. It's just the round he's going in, I'm looking for something, a little more consistent. I'd feel way better about Dobbins, Drake, if he was falling down, to the end of the 3rd, even in the early 4th, more in the price range with like a David Montgomery, that type of player. Then you could probably talk me into, okay, not going to have the same role, but he could be more efficient, right, than Montgomery. But right now, I just don't, I don't see J.K. Dobbins taking over, 60% of the attempts. Because if he did that, once you take out Lamar Jackson's, you'd be saying that Gus Edwards is only going to get 10%. So that's where I'm at on Dobbins.
No team in the NFL, according to PFF, had less catchable passes than the Baltimore Ravens receivers. 306 catchable passes last year. Even Cam Newton and that offense, they were worse than that. And so that spins us over to Marquise Brown, who caught 58 balls. So everybody was kind of on the Marquise Brown hype train. Hey, he's going to, really pop this year. We're going to have a, really nice sleeper kind of wide receiver too. He's going to emerge. He got 100 targets, scored 8 touchdowns, but, early on in the season, you couldn't even use the guy. It was abysmal. But where do you have him projected? He's going right now, I believe, about the 9th round. What is the landing spot preferably for you for Hollywood Brown?
Man, I'll take Hollywood Brown all day in the 9th round. Like, people just got a little too high on him last year, right? Yeah. Knowing the offense that we're dealing with. Again, it's kind of like if you squint hard enough, you can see whatever you want, right? And so what people saw was, well, I got an ascending young receiver. Mm-hmm. And you're right. You did have a potential ascending young receiver, but once you took the offense, that he was playing into account, like the 6th round, which is basically where he was going last year, was too high. But now the overcorrection has happened, right, to the 9th round. I like him. I'm willing to take Hollywood Brown in the 8th round. I love him as my wide receiver 3 or wide receiver 4, right? And that's basically the territory you're going to get Hollywood Brown in. Do you really want him to be, your wide receiver 2? No. In a small league? No. But in a 12-person league where you've got 2 flex spots, 2 receivers, 2 running backs, talking like an FFPC style, man, I will take Hollywood Brown. I'm going to own him a lot, for a 9th round pick. If you look at, Lamar Jackson last year, his completion percentage held steady. His adjusted completion percentage held steady. His clean, passer rating fell, a little bit, but he was still 19 out of 32. Under pressure, he was still great, 7 out of 32. Positive graded throws, 8 out of 32. Negative graded throw, 29 out of 32. Big time throws, 11 out of 32. His turnover worthy plays went up, 24 out of 32. So, I mean, and when you look at his accuracy, we know that he's below average, right? He's minus 2% basically versus the league average on targets to his receivers that are within the frame, meaning it's catchable. The receiver doesn't have to do something crazy to catch it. And if you look at his catchable inaccurate passes, meaning receiver does have to make a weird adjustment to catch the ball, he ranks badly, right? He's 30 out of 32. So that gets to your point right around him. But if you look at him on uncatchable balls, just totally uncatchable, he was still 7 out of 32 with that lower number being better. So yeah, did his receivers have to make adjustments? Did he really have pinpoint accuracy? No, but he didn't throw a ton of uncatchable balls. Now, for a guy like Hollywood Brown, you could argue, well, like the guy didn't have a huge catch radius, right? I mean, he's kind of small. So maybe that's a bigger impact. I haven't necessarily dug in and studied that, but that could be reasonable. But if you look at, Lamar Jackson, the biggest thing, right, is his touchdowns per attempt dropped. The year before it was 9%. It was astronomical. It went down to 6.9%, which is still elite. So he's still going to be fine, right? From a perspective of Hollywood Brown having opportunities to catch touchdown passes. He gets used a ton on play action. I think that Hollywood Brown will be the number one target in this offense. Yes, I've read about Sammy Watkins. Yes, I know they drafted Rashod Bateman. But this offense has been trying to draft people for how long, Drake?
Devin Duvernay and was it
Miles Boykin?
The kid Swope or whatever, the kid in the slot out of Texas Tech or whatever.
Yeah, so they've spent a lot of equity, right, on the receivers, and they do want to get it right. But I still think that Brown. Now, I'm not saying Brown is going to go nuts, but if you look at him last year down the stretch over the last 6 games, 34% target share when the Ravens were really trying to make their push and get into the playoffs. He was 23% on the season if you adjust him for the game he missed. So 34% target share over the last 6 games. So even if you're think A.J. Brown, right? You're in a run-heavy offense, but getting heavily targeted. I'm not saying he's A.J. Brown. Like, don't confuse me. Don't at me on Twitter. Don't do any of that. Like, I'm not saying he's A.J. Brown, but you're talking about a similar target share to what we were seeing with A.J. Brown. And you can do a lot with a target share of 34%, even if you're running the ball a ton, like what we saw with the Titans. So he's a guy that I really like. Like, I could easily see him being a player that, helps some people win some leagues. I've got him at 115 target streak. I got him at 73 receptions, 950 yards receiving, and 7 touchdowns. That's 214 PPR
a few more
points.
Receptions. Puts him in the same
Adjusted,
ballpark touchdowns last year.
Yeah, adjusted, that's 201. Like, when I mean adjusted, so back to 6, if you were looking at 16 games, just to give people that context. So, yeah, I'm on board with Marquise Brown. I think Rashod Bateman and Sammy Watkins are going to rotate a lot. I think Bateman's probably going to play the slot more. I don't see them doing a lot. I have Watkins at 10% of the targets. I have Bateman at 12%. I really like Bateman, so don't get me wrong. But I think the top 2 targets on this team, and the other guy we should talk about, is Mark Andrews. Also has fallen too far in drafts. Last year, people got a little bit excited, right? Because we're like, well, he's the guy that could be up there with Kelsey and Kittle. And what we were telling people is, no, that person's Darren Waller. And now we see Waller is the guy being drafted that way. But now it's, again, the overreaction. Now Andrews is falling too far from that pack, right? And so sometimes you will see Andrews go after Hawkinson. I see Andrews go after Kyle Pitts. I think that's a mistake. I think Andrews should be right there with Hawkinson. I would take him over. And again, we talked about Kyle Pitts last episode. So if you folks want to know what we think about him, it's not that, I'm down on Pitts. I like Mark Andrews, though. I've got him at 24% of the targets. That's 111. I've got him at 72 receptions for 900 yards and 7.5 touchdowns. So in a tight end premium league, that's 243 points. If you adjust that for 16 games, that's 229. If you look at a normal PPR, that's 207 points.
And he finished last year at tight end 6, just a few points behind Hawkinson. And again, he only played 14 games. He played 2 less games than Tanyan, Thomas, Hawkinson, all who finished ahead of him right now. His ADP right now on Underdog, 61, nearly 20 spots behind Kyle Pitts.
See, that's insane. These are the inefficiencies that if you're drafting right now, you have to take advantage of. That's just a bad take. I'm sorry. It just is. Mark Andrews should not be that far from Kyle Pitts. Even if you tell me you'd rather own Kyle Pitts than Mark Andrews, and we somehow work through that, and I'm like, okay, great, do it. Mark Andrews shouldn't be going 20 picks after him.
We have a guy asking here for Rashod Bateman's target share.
I've got Bateman at 12%. Him and Watkins are they're gonna hurt each other. Again, what's the thing we've talked about, and we've been talking about on this show for 3 years, Drake, that the Ravens do at all of their positions except quarterback and offensive line?
They rotate everybody. Now, last year, Marquise Brown, he broke that trend down the stretch. But even that's what keeps Mark Andrews, honestly, from ascending to the top tier, is he's only on the field for about 70% of the routes, right? So every time, if you look at all the times
Lamar Jackson dropped back to pass, or the Ravens, period. Lamar Jackson missed, some time. He was just at 70%. You want your tight end. The elite tight ends are up at 80 and 90%, right? But there's only a few of them. And then you've got your 70% is still good, but then you've got your guys down at your 60 and 50%. A lot of times they're being asked to block more, like Chris Herndon was last year by Adam Gase. I know you love Adam Gase, so I just have to get something in there about Adam Gase.
Hey, we got a trade question here in the chat. That's why if you're in the live chat, you can ask us direct questions. It's awesome. Robert asks, keeper question. Not a trade, keeper. I'm sorry. Keeper question. If you guys end up having time, I can keep CMC with a first, Travis Kelce with a second, AJ Brown with a third, or DK Metcalf with a fifth. Who do you keep if you can keep one? And what about two? So again, it's pretty much almost in line with some ADP here. So CMC with a first, Kelce with a second, AJ Brown with a third. I'm not keeping AJ Brown in the third. That's just me. DK Metcalf with a fifth. If it's me and this is PPR, I mean, you're getting them at value. I'm keeping CMC and Travis Kelce with my first and second round picks.
Yeah,
you're getting the best players of the position.
I am too. Now it's obviously dependent on your league, and you're getting a feel for what you think is going to be released. And so if you think that second round, there's potentially something juicy, like you got an owner leaving the league, you got two owners leaving the league, that kind of thing. Only you guys know that stuff. So you got to take that into account. So if there's something super juicy there where you think like there's a chance, you got two top running backs going into the pool, depending on where you're picking, all that kind of stuff, then I may throw Kelce back. And if I did, I would keep Metcalf with a fifth, right? Instead of AJ Brown with my third. And I would keep Metcalf with my fifth. I would keep two players. But to Drake's point, all things being equal, assuming there's not going to be these super studs that you have a chance of landing with your second round pick, I'm keeping CMC and Kelce. I think those are both differentiating players for your roster where you're going to be putting your opponent at a deficit nearly every single week with both players.
Dwain, Buffalo's another team where the quarterback's the goal line back. The Bills ran the third most red zone plays in the NFL last year, 200 to be exact. And as a team, they scored 16 rushing touchdowns. Their running backs, however, Devin Singletary and Zach Moss, combined to score 6 of the 16. So they were third in the NFL in passing, 20th in rushing. We got a very good O-line here. Thoughts on this Bills backfield? How do you have Singletary and Moss projected?
Man, I really don't want either one. Just reading, looking at how things played out down the stretch last season, and then seeing the way the coaches are talking about them this preseason, and the coaching staff is back. I don't see a lot changing. I think like the data points are pointing to you're going to really have this split kind of backfield. I think Moss takes a slight edge over Singletary. Down the stretch last year, he had 38% of the rushing attempts versus 32% for Singletary. And he did start to take away more of the inside the 5 snaps as well, which is great. But again, what you just mentioned, the real inside the 5 running back for the Bills is probably still Josh Allen. Now, the problem that Moss has, right, he just was not active in the 2-minute offense. So Devin Singletary gets that. So you could make an argument that given how far apart they are, like if you just feeling like taking a Bills running back and throwing a dart at it, just take Singletary, because the Bills, they throw the ball a lot. They're willing to use the 2-minute offense. They're willing to, throw the ball 80 times in a game if they need to win the game. And so Singletary in a PPR type format is probably priced right too far behind Moss. But if you just tell me pick one that I think is going to actually score more points for the season, I think they're going to be really close. If you want me to pick the player that I think has the higher upside, I think it's Moss, because if by some chance Moss did start to take over more of the passing down work, right, he could turn more into a guy getting some of the work inside the 5, getting some of the passing work. I don't think Singletary is going to take over the work inside the 5, right? I don't think Singletary gives me, quite the upside Moss does. But I'll be honest, I'm not messing around with those two dudes very much, Drake. And I've heard some really smart people say, hey, taking Singletary late is money. And it may be, but even when we saw Zach Moss gone and we saw games where Singletary you're kind of like, wow, he's all they have. Like it never clicked. Now, again, that's not saying it can't. That was a small sample size. So certainly like if Zach Moss goes down, Singletary's, his value goes up. But they do also have Matt Breida now, so we don't know how they're going to use him. So it's just a situation I'm steering clear of, Drake. I don't have any conviction around this backfield.
Yeah, Breida going off, not Breida, Zach Moss in his second year now. He's a 9th round pick on Underdog, and Devin Singletary is starting off the 12th round coming off.
So I think the other problem is like the receivers going in the 9th round. I just want to put myself in a position in the way I build my roster that in the 9th round, I'm taking receivers. Or if a quarterback slides that I really like, I'm taking a quarterback in the 8th or 9th round. I don't want to be jacking around with Zach Moss in the 9th round. That's just not an optimal build to me. It's like, you know, you're kind of, when you get to that point, you're like, fuck, I got to take Zach Moss. Like I just, you know, I'm out on Zach Moss.
Let's transition now to the wide receivers because it gets interesting here. Of course, we'll get your thoughts on Stephon Diggs. He's going off the board currently at wide receiver 2. But then after that, it gets pretty interesting. You've got Gabe Davis, who everyone is all over right now. He's coming off the board in the 11th round. Cole Beasley, you know, he's coughing all over the field, and you know, he'll still be there. We think he's coming off just a hair later. But they added Emmanuel Sanders, who is a very, very good football player when he's on the field. John Brown no longer there. You want to talk about a steal and a half. Emmanuel Sanders coming off the board in what did I say? The third best passing offense in the NFL. Emmanuel Sanders, professional wide receiver 68. That, my friends, is a bargain. So let's hear what you think about Davis, Beasley, and Sanders before the given that is Stephon Diggs.
Yeah, we don't spend too much time here either. You know, I don't have like any super juicy nuggets, but I agree with what you just said. If I can get Emmanuel Sanders that late, what's the chance, right, that Emmanuel Sanders just turns into number 2 in this offense? Like it could happen.
The 13th round.
I think it's tough to project him. You're just saying, hey, he's going to take it over. I think that's tough. But again, the price tag is solid in an offense you know is going to throw a ton, and they're going to score points. You know, I mean, if you look at Josh Allen, as good as his year was, like he kind of had an above average year, right, on his touchdowns per attempt. So, I mean, there's still upside, you know, if he gets one of those years where things click right for him, which every quarterback eventually gets, right? You know, and really good quarterbacks get them every once in a while. So Aaron Rodgers, right, has had those 9% years. We talked about Lamar Jackson 2 years ago having a 9% touchdown per attempt rate. If Josh Allen all of a sudden has one of those off the chain years where it's like, you know, 8%, something like that, you know, he can support 2 receivers in the top 24, right? Maybe even support 3 receivers, right? This is crazy that we're saying this. Like Josh Allen's turnaround is honestly the most miraculous thing that you know how deep I dig into the data, Drake. It's the most miraculous turnaround I've ever seen in my life, ever. Like the odds were so against Josh Allen turning into the passer that he was last year. You had an offense that was all run all the time, turn into all pass all the time, same coordinator. You had a quarterback that was one of the least accurate in NFL history in their first 2 years in the league. Like I'm talking down with Jamarcus Russell bad. Totally reworks his mechanics to turn into a really accurate quarterback. And we saw some signs of it the year before, but not enough to ever make the leap of faith. And, oh, by the way, you have a team like Minnesota willing to let Stephon Diggs go, a true bona fide number 1 receiver who gave, you know, Josh Allen, you know, a lot of people talk about the drags and crosses. Really, like Stephon Diggs' money route is a comeback, right? And it's one of the easier passes to complete in the NFL because you get the cornerback backpedaling, you break underneath, and so you don't have to gauge the receiver to lead them, right? All you got to do is just put it on their numbers, right? So they're coming back to you, they're working back to you. So even if the DB has tight coverage, like it's a higher percentage throw. And so Stephon Diggs is like one of the best in the league at doing that. You added that to the offense and it like changed everything. And so anyway, sorry.
Bills Mafia loves you now.
I know they do. And yeah. I was making, you know, I was putting up pictures of Josh Allen and his accuracy rate and saying, hey, Stephon Diggs, welcome to the Josh Allen life. Like as in it was going to be bad. And, you know, I was completely wrong.
Yeah, then he gets hit with 166 targets, catches 127 of them for 1,500 yards. Holy smokes, what a year he had. Now, here's the thing. Now, we're drafting him a wide receiver too. Can he repeat this?
Yeah, he can. He can. Now, look, Josh Allen wasn't perfect last year. There were still some things, like just slightly – he was really good. But, there were some things still just slightly, sitting below the surface. His if you look at his rating, clean 11 out of 32. Under pressure was solid 9 out of 32. Positive graded throws 6 out of 32. Really good. Negative graded throws 22 out of 32. That's not something you want to see. Have tons of big time throws 8 out of 32 and big time throw percentage. Turnover worthy plays though still 22 of 32. He got a little bit lucky last year with how his turnovers worked. So he could easily throw more picks this season. But again, I'm not gonna lie. Everywhere else, every level of the field, he was above the NFL average in accuracy. Behind the line of scrimmage, short, which is 0 to 9 yards. Intermediate, 10 to 19 yards. Actually, intermediate, he was minus 3.5% versus the league average. But again, over 20 yards, he was right at the league average. So really good. He threw an open receiver. 60% of his throws as receiver had a step or more of separation. That's plus 5% above the NFL average. Ask guys like Joe Burrow, right, who we'll talk about in a minute, how they feel about they would love to have that. He threw to an open target only 42%, of the time. That's 14% below the league average. Josh Allen was throwing to an open target 5% more than the average quarterback. And that is the impact Stephon Diggs is having on your offense.
Now, Josh Allen, of course, finished at the number 1 fantasy quarterback. He was the only quarterback to score over 400 points last season, averaging over 25 points per game. Only Patrick Mahomes did the same. Can he repeat that? Where we're taking him in drafts right now. Let's see. Josh Allen coming off the board. He's QB2. He's coming off 50th. He's a 5th-round pick. If you like taking your quarterback early, hey, you're getting a dual threat guy, someone we know can finish in the top 5. Would you pull the trigger 5th round on Josh Allen?
I'm not going to argue with anybody that does, Drake, because he's got the legs and he's got a high volume passing offense. I mean, I'm not going to argue if somebody wants to grade him as their number 1 quarterback. And I mean, obviously you're going to, the respect hat tip, right, as you put Mahomes there because he's done it longer. And I would agree. I'm going to take Mahomes first. But after that, I love Allen. I love Kyler Murray. I'm really good, and I love Lamar Jackson. I like all 3 of those players, but I think Murray and Allen, I give a slight edge over Lamar Jackson because I like their passing upside to go with their rushing.
All right, we've been talking Joe Mixon on this show since I think Joe Mixon was born. Report comes out in The Athletic. They do great stuff. Paul Diener of The Athletic writes that Joe Mixon could receive his biggest workload of his career. No shit. No Gio Bernard. There's rookie Chris Evans from Michigan. He was drafted kind of late. So here's the thing, Dwayne. We all know Mixon's just got to stay on the field. I guess we could say it's an improved offensive line. If Burrow's in there and he's healthy, which nobody knows about. Everyone talks like Joe Burrow is just walking in day 1. Hey, I'm healthy. I'm great. He had a significant knee injury in the middle of the season.
End of the season. I mean, December.
Yeah, end of the season. So people are talking oh yeah, Joe Burrow's going to walk back in. He's going to kick some ass. We don't know that. Go look back also. Outside of Deshaun Watson, how many quarterbacks come off that ACL and have big-time seasons? It doesn't happen. Literally, Watson's the only guy who had even a remotely mediocre season coming off an ACL. But I digress. So let's dive into the Bengals here. We know you're a big Joe Mixon fan this year. What do you got him projected at?
Yeah, and I'm not letting you off that easy. You're making it sound all easy now, but we all know, all the Hustler listeners know how much you pooped on Joe Mixon in previous
You're
episodes.
damn right I did.
You guys run the tape back. Drake's a hero tonight, but we all know in our hearts that Drake does not like Joe Mixon. Okay?
Not at all.
Anyway. But hey, think about it. What do? We adjust. Last year, what did we tell people to do with Joe Mixon? Tell him to pound sand. We're don't take Joe Mixon. Mm-hmm. Gio Bernard's there. He's not going to get the passing down work. People are oh no, man, look at Joe Mixon down the stretch last year. He was, Jonathan Taylor from this last year. Yes, I'm intentionally saying that and pausing for dramatic effect. Sorry. I don't know if it worked or not. But again, let it sink in. same kind of thing where people were jumping. And what did we tell people last year? Guys, go look at the games Joe Mixon had all the carries. It was either A, in games where the Bengals, managed to be ahead, or B, it was at the end of the season when they just wanted it to be over. They were literally just saying, how do we run the clock out and just get, off the field, get on the bus, go draft Joe Burrow and have another season. So now, though, is a completely different scenario because you have Gio Bernard gone. And I know there's guys like you that ask me, oh, man, Chris Evans is going to take over the 2-minute offense. I know you're not saying it now, Drake, but you were. Got to hold you accountable.
I drafted Chris Evans in a dynasty league, but I own Joe Burrow or Joe Mixon.
And so, you did hear in minicamp. So here was the direct quote, right, that you heard in minicamp from Zach Taylor. He said, that Joe Mixon makes us better when we're on the field. He is going to share some of the passing downs because we don't need him to take 75 snaps. Okay. So 75 snaps would literally be like everything, in a game. But if you look down the stretch last year, and because Samaje Perine is the back that they re-signed, and if you look at what they really used Perine to do, he ran the long down and distance role, right? So he was in to basically block on passing downs. Joe Mixon has not traditionally really been that great of a pass blocker on long down and situation roles. So I see Samaje Perine, what he's telling you there. This is what I believe is happening. Samaje Perine is going to take the long down and distance role. That's their way of giving Mixon also a breather. But remember, backs are not really into routes that often in long down and distance. Some teams do, but it's more exceptions than others. It's really more of a blocking role, and then it may turn into a check down if everything else goes, crappy. But really, you want to throw the ball past the sticks to get a first down. So Joe Mixon, though, has handled the 2-minute offense in the past. And last year, even in a couple of games, he handled it, even with Gio Bernard playing. So Joe Mixon is a better passing option in the passing game when you want a receiver in the route than Samaje Perine. And even if you look at Samaje Perine, once he took over that role and started to get a little bit of work down the stretch, because Mixon was hurt after week 6, remember? He had the midfoot sprain, which is honestly my biggest concern with Joe Mixon is just, can his feet stay healthy? So when you look at Samaje Perine, like his adjusted target share, even if I adjusted it for the season, like adjust to like 2%, right? They're not trying to get Samaje Perine the ball in the passing game. So I'm all over Mixon this year. Do you want me to give you what I have Mixon projected for? Like you should do, I don't know if you have like a sounder or a drum roll. And I re-looked at this.
Yeah, we're not that high tech of a show here yet.
I looked at it multiple times, just making sure how I feel about it. So I've got Joe Mixon at 313 rushing attempts. Last year, he handled 85% of the attempts when he was the back in those, if you take out week 6, which he got hurt in. So the first 5 games, 85% of the rushing attempts. So I bumped him down to 75%, right? And I gave Perine 15%. But that puts him at 313 attempts. Again, we're talking about a 17-game season, folks.
Yeah.
1,251 rushing yards, so only giving him 4 yards per attempt. Even assuming that the Bengals offense doesn't take a big leap forward and have more plays inside the 5, which is how you can spike your touchdowns per attempt, is get more attempts inside. I stayed conservative and just kept in at 3% touchdowns per attempt. Like, the better backs in the league that get this kind of workload are often around a 4%, mark, right? Bad backs are around like 2.5%. So I have Mixon even still kind of graded to the lower end of that scale. Comes out to 9 rushing touchdowns. And I've got him at 14% of the targets. So that's 89 targets. That's 71 catches for 500 yards. And I have him at 2 receiving touchdowns, 2.5 technically. That's 318 PPR points. That is definitely more PPR points than what Jonathon Taylor is going to score. Unless Joe Mixon gets hurt, you can literally lock that up.
Or until they realize he can't pass block and Samaje Perine is in there all the time because their quarterback's got one.
You're not pass blocking in the 2-minute offense, though. That's the point. You're pass blocking in the long down and distance offense, right? Which may be 3 plays out of your 2-minute offense and the 20 that you run. And at that point, they don't sub out because it's the 2-minute offense, right? And you're hurrying up. So long down and distance is specific. Hey, we're taking our time. We're having a normal methodical drive. Oh, it's 3rd and 8. Hey, Joe, take a breather. Samaje, get in there. The only way, that hurts Mixon is if all of a sudden the next play they say, oh, let's go hurry up, which can happen occasionally. And that skews things from game to game. But Mixon will be the 2-minute back. You guys can lock it up. If he's not, you can at me. You can send me hate mail. You can do it all. And I'll probably I will take it all on because I'll need it because I'm going to own so much Joe Mixon. Like I'll just need that extra little bit of motivation from you guys, just to crush my spirit.
Yeah, there's going to be a bet coming at some point here between me and you on this Joe Mixon stuff. I'll think of something fun for us to do, but let's move it over.
Dude, everything's great. It's a fast-paced offense. They throw the ball a lot. I mean, the offensive line is getting – and this is me saying that he's not even in the top range of touchdown outcomes. This is me saying he's like a meh touchdown option. This is just volume. That's all that is.
I want Mixon to be good. He is my RB2 on a big money dynasty league team. My running backs are him and McCaffrey. So I have vested interest in Mixon being good. I've been beaten down. I'm a broken man with Joe Mixon, Dwain.
I get it, man. Hey, and you know what? The injury thing, it could happen. But and injury prediction stuff has come a long way. But a lot of the people that I turn to in the industry that I really listen to, still say, look, it's not an exact science as far as we've come, right? And we see it every year, like with guys that, I think it was funny. Ian Hartitz just the other day said, remember when everybody thought Keenan Allen was injury prone until he wasn't? And now he's had 4 seasons in a row of basically playing all the games almost. So the same thing can easily happen, right, with Joe Mixon.
Oh, they said something about Frank Gore. I remember early in his year, he had a year or two, and then Frank Gore played 100 years without getting hurt. How about these receivers? So Jamar Chase, obviously drafted very highly, comes in. Oh, by the way, T. Higgins is still here. He finished 28th in PPR last year. Tyler Boyd in the slot. He finished 29th. Can Joe Burrow, all of one leg, support 3 top 30, let's call it, PPR wide receivers in this offense? And are people too high on Jamar Chase and too low, I would say, on T. Higgins? And I can get you their ADP right now. Jamar Chase's ADP is 20. He's wide receiver 20. Higgins is wide receiver 24. Boyd, the value of all of them, wide receiver 36.
Yeah, so let's zoom out just for a second, right, on this offense. You look at Zach Taylor. Comes from the Sean McVay tree of coaching, right? Runs a ton of 11 personnel. If you look at it last year, 10 personnel, they ran 4.5%. That was 4th in the league. So 10 personnel is 4 wide receivers. 11 personnel is 3 wide receivers on the field. So 75.3%. That's 1st in the league. That's 15% above the NFL average last season. So those guys are going to be out there. They run a decent amount of plays per game, 64 last year, 15th. That's 15th in the league, but right at the league average. The year before that, 65 plays per game. That was 9th. That's excluding overtime. I take overtime anytime out, right? So we can level the playing field across these teams. If you look at the pass neutral rate, basically for the Bengals, so when the games are within 3 points, 65% of the time they threw the ball in 2020. That tells you a lot about the identity of the team. 61% in 2019, 63% in 2018. Right? If you look at when they're trailing, they actually, are on the low end, 67, 69, and 68%. And that's because, right, they try to tie everything together with the run game. But that is where I really believe Zach Taylor has been ineffective. He has not given Joe Burrow. He's living off of volume. These receivers are going to live off volume, which is fine for fantasy. But I think Zach Taylor is doing his offense a disservice. When I look at offensive coordinators, the way I think about them, Drake, is how are they actually helping their quarterback go to a new level? You can't just be Mike McCarthy and say, I got Aaron Rodgers. I'm a badass coach. No, you're not. What LaFleur is doing for Aaron Rodgers, getting what he is out of the receivers they had through the scheme and all the play action, all those things, he's helping Aaron Rodgers level up his game, right? McCarthy wasn't. It's like, hey, line up, everybody in the same spot. We're going 3 wide, and we're going to run the play clock down every time and take it real slow, right? So the problem with Cincinnati right now, I think, is the coaching staff. Like schematically, the 11 personnel is great, the 10 personnel is great, but I don't know how much meat is on the bone from an efficiency standpoint. Play action, they were 22nd in the league. Right? Minus 3% versus, the league average, minus 10% versus the Rams offense last year, right? Where McVay's at.
You're stealing my thunder. We're looking at the same stats, my friend.
Yeah, shift in motion, 45%, right? That's 22nd in the league, minus 5% versus the league average. Trick looks, 9%. That's 15th in the league, minus 1% versus the league average. McVay was, that's 15% below what McVay ran out there last year. And they run shotgun all the time, right? They don't ever get under center. Now, part of that is probably Joe Burrow's transition, right? And I don't know that that's going to change this year. But, they don't give enough variations of their looks. They pretty much look the same all the time. You've got to make the defense have to pause and think about something to give your quarterback that extra, just that extra quarter of a second, extra, it's a few milliseconds, right, in the league, but it's just enough doubt. And that's what the Shanahans do. That's what McVay does. The really good coordinators in the league, even the Bills last year, right? They ran all this stuff. And most of the time you're not running a trick play, but the trick look makes the defense have to stop and go, wait, what's this? I haven't seen this on film. And to me, coordinators are not doing this stuff enough. Now, sometimes you may have a team that you think can't execute. Maybe it's young. Maybe that was the case with Cincinnati. You're trying to get everybody on the same page. You're like, man, we just got to get the basics down, right? We're a young team. Could have been the case, and maybe we see these things improve. But in my opinion, you're not seeing Zach Taylor, help the offense out. So now, having said that, there's going to be plenty of volume. But I get a little skittish to your point. Like when I don't have a coordinator helping the quarterback, and I basically am just 100% leaning on a young quarterback like Joe Burrow, like you said, coming off an injury, I get a little bit squeamish, Drake, about thinking that all of these guys can be there. Now, if you just run the normal numbers, and if you look at the way the Rams offense ran from a distribution of targets, it is pretty similar. Basically, each player is between 17 and 20% of the targets. If you adjust it for games missed, like last year, AJ Brown would have been 17%, T Higgins would have been 18%, and Tyler Boyd was right at 20% once you adjust. And that's pretty much where you've seen the Rams be there. And we've talked about them multiple times on the show. They're somewhere between 18 and 22% each. And so right now I have them all basically even at 19% of the targets. So who am I taking? The one that costs the least, right? Because unless I want to build a stack, which I'm fine if you want to build, a Bengals stack, I'm just not super elated about it just because of what I said around the coordinator. Now that could get better. So I don't mind having a few Bengals stacks, but I'm not putting 20%, my rosters in Bengal stacks. When it works out and I can build a Bengal stack, I'm going to do it. But I'm not like intentionally saying I'm going to, build this many Bengal stacks. I'm not going to do it. Plus, I think the edge is gone because a lot of people are on it right now. Maybe if that changes later and we get more news around Joe Burrow, we get more news around the offense, and we think there's going to be some change, then great. But I mean, each of them I've got Drake, approaching 70 targets, and I've got Boyd, up over 80 because he's running the lowest ADOT, right? He's running the slot stuff, so he gets the best matchup. He gets the highest completion percentage. Now he doesn't get as many yards after the catch, right? He's not a great yards after the catch guy. He's more of a possession slot type receiver. He's not a big play guy. But what's the reason Jamar Chase is going so high? It's Justin Jefferson. Look what Justin Jefferson did, Brian. He's from LSU. I mean, you got to get in on it. Like that, literally, I'm not joking. People will argue with me and say, that's not what I'm doing. Yes, you are. Like if Justin Jefferson didn't happen last year, and oh, by the way, you had Chase Claypool produce better than what we thought, he would do as a rookie. We were on Dez Bryant. I mean, not Dez Bryant. We were on CeeDee Lamb, right? I'm thinking of the 88. Like as long as I don't say Michael Irvin, then I'd be like really going back too far. We had CeeDee Lamb, and we were excited about him last year. We had him as our highest ranked rookie receiver, and he delivered, right? Even with, had he stayed with Dak, like what would have happened with CeeDee Lamb? So people see that, right? And I think there's an over adjustment. Now, I'm not saying Jamar Chase is a bad pick, right? In the 5th round. I'm just not like super confident about it. I think these 3 receivers are going to be really close together for multiple reasons. Number one, this is the way they run this offense. It's very evenly distributed, right? Number two, he is still a rookie receiver. So I'm already saying he's going to be even with T Higgins and Tyler Boyd from a target share standpoint. Like I'm already giving him a benefit of the doubt, right? And so I think what you're going to need for Jamar Chase to really hit the upside some people want. Now, I'm not saying that he's a horrible pick in the 5th round. I'm just thinking about my roster construction, and I'm not going out of my way to land Jamar Chase. I'm going to have him on a few teams. I just as much prefer taking T. Higgins. How much further behind him is he going, Drake, a round later?
Yeah, underdog ADP. Jamar Chase coming off the board at wide receiver 20, 45th overall. Higgins, wide receiver 24. About 10 picks later about.
I mean, they're close, but yes, I think they're going to be close to each other. And is there a chance that I think the chance is just as good that T. Higgins outperforms Jamar Chase, right, as it is Jamar Chase outperforming T. Higgins. And I love Jamar Chase. Like, I think he's a great prospect. I really like him. And a lot of people that I listen to that, watch a lot of film or do a lot of analytics around Dynasty, they like Jamar Chase too. So, I mean, I'm on board with Jamar Chase. And in Dynasty, like, he should be a top 3 pick unless you're in a super flex league, and that may change things. But looking at Jamar Chase in a redraft, I'm not going to go out of my way to own him, Drake. I don't think he's necessarily a bad price at the 5th round, but I just think, it's not like it's necessarily a value. I've got these guys all close together. And where's Tyler Boyd go? Because I have them all basically at the same points.
Yeah, he's definitely later. Hang on, I can tell you exactly where Tyler Boyd's going. He's going wide receiver 36, pick 78. So he's a 7th round pick.
Tyler Boyd's going to get 18 to 20% of the targets.
Mm-hmm.
Not going to all of a sudden be Jamar Chase getting 25, 30% of the targets. It's not the way the offense works.
So Jamar Chase comes off the board middle, if he's coming off the board 45th, he's a 4th round pick.
Yeah,
would you rather have Tyler? Here's the 3 guys coming off after him. Tell me if you'd rather have them. Tyler Lockett.
Yes, I would take
Cooper
Tyler
Kupp.
Lockett. Close.
Adam
the same
Thielen.
Thing. I'm taking Thielen.
Okay.
And look, I'm not going to blame people. I get why it happens because people think we know what Lockett is. He's X, and you're right. But it's a good known quantity. People know what Adam Thielen is, and he's getting older. It's like we know what he is. Jamar Chase is the lure of the unknown. It's like, oh, there could be all this upside. And I agree, Jamar Chase's talent is elite. But people just think about it. Think about Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, and Brandon Cooks. Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp and Sammy Watkins. Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp. Give me, I don't care, whatever name you want to give me, right? I mean, this is a similar offense, and they've ran it this way for the past couple of years. It's pretty evenly distributed. Could that totally break? Could that trend break? Yeah, but it's a pretty strong trend that I think is pretty dependable. I don't see Jamar Chase, having a lot more upside than guys that you can take right there by him that are proven that may not have some of the downside you got to deal with a rookie.
And maybe, like we talked about, Joe Mixon coming through, that helps because Cincinnati was 20th in the NFL in play action passes. We referenced the Bills. They were number 1. So if we could get a little more play action, we know that helps passing offenses, and that could help Burrow and all these receivers. The last thing,
if you look at just real quick,
sure,
because I have something saved. So rookie wide receivers, I saved this in Ultimate over at PFF. So sing a song or something it's populating. It's going to take.
We'll just say, hey, if you want to go get your own PFF subscription, save 25%. Use promo code Hustle. A lot of good stuff over there, and the college guide just dropped. That's really kick ass. Go see where they ranked Syracuse. I'm sure it is last or next to last. So I can save you that time.
Yeah. Awesome. And it's still churning. Like, people don't understand how much Ultimate does, but here it is, right? So let's just look since 2007. Okay. So we've got Kelvin Benjamin, basically where you're taking, Jamar Chase. You're thinking what? You got to be thinking that basically you're getting 75 catches and 1,000 yards, maybe 70 catches and 1,000 yards.
Yeah, you think this guy's be better than Adam
7 or 8
Thielen,
touchdowns.
who scored 14
you
touchdowns.
Really feel good about it. Yeah. So if we look at from a target perspective, you've got Kelvin Benjamin in 2014 had 142 targets. Odell Beckham, right, had 129. Those were both first-round draft picks, just like Jamar Chase. Justin Blackmon, man, going back with the Jags, 2012, had 129 targets. Eddie Royal as a rookie, right?
Oh, my God.
With the Broncos, 127 targets, and he was like a third-round pick. Sammy Watkins with the Bills in 2014, 124 targets, 980 yards, 6 touchdowns. Amari Cooper, I get it. Like, people like, okay, the upside is gone from Amari, but this was an elite rookie season, 123 targets, 72 receptions, 1,070 yards, and 6 touchdowns. So these rookies can do it. Justin Jefferson last year, right? 121 targets, and his came on the efficiency, 88 receptions, so a very high reception rate, right? And then 1,400 yards and 7 touchdowns. Michael Thomas, 92 receptions, 1,100 yards, 9 touchdowns. So, I mean, it happens, but again, we're naming all the good ones, Drake. Think of these receivers like, if I like keep going and like start going down the board further and further, like more rookies hit, miss, right, than hit. I know the league's different. I know it can happen quicker now, but I just don't see the reason, right, to have to force it with Chase. And I do feel like in the 4th round, again, I get the decision point and where people's logic is going. And we'll have to come back to this because what I'm trying to figure out is like, how do I just get around that? Is it just because I'm going to take Thielen or I'm going to take one of these other players? Or am I just doing something different with my roster construction strategy when people are zigging and I'm zagging? And so we'll have to work through that.
Yeah, I'm trying to see what else you could do there. Like, what tight ends are coming off the board? And that's an area where, it's like Kyle Pitts. It's too early for Hawkinson and Andrews.
And T. Higgins has already proven, right, that he can do it. So, and he's a young ascending player too. I mean, so
I love T. Higgins.
It's like I can get him around later. If I'm going to take a stab at the Bengals receiving core, I'm going to take Higgins, or I'm just going to take Tyler Boyd. He gets to play in the slot. His targets are not going to evaporate. I promise.
All right, Dwain, we're about an hour and a half in. Do you want to hit the Panthers or we save them for next week?
I don't care, man. Whatever. What do the people want?
So I'll quickly ask you this. We know about McCaffrey. We know he's going off at 101 right now. What people may not remember about the Panthers is Teddy Bridgewater and his elite mediocrity supported 2 top 25 wide receivers last year in PPR with Robbie Anderson and DJ Moore. Now you get Sam Darnold. We assume that's an upgrade. We're not sure.
Assume that, but
yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, we've seen Sam Darnold play and not play well. So just kind of give me your thought on this Panthers offense. Throw a couple of projections at us for
sure. Yeah,
for DJ Moore, who everyone knows we love.
Yeah, I'll go rapid fire. So just real quick, Sam Darnold, it's just looked bad for 3 years. And so last year, 32 out of 32 passing from a clean pocket, which is the most stable passing stat that you can look at, right?
Hey, my Eagles weren't last there. I respect that.
You look at it outside the pocket, you look at it under pressure, it's just less of a stable stat. So versus pressure, 10 out of 32. Positive graded throws, one of the worst in the league, only 20. He was 29th out of 32. You want to be like number 1 out of 32. That'd be really good. Negative throws, 24 out of 32. So now the opposite in the fact that's bad, 24 out of 32. So big time throws, 31 out of 32. Turnover worthy plays, 26 out of 32. On target passes, 29 out of 32. Third downs, 26 out of 32. Accuracy within the frame, right? Just catchable, 30th out of 32. Catchable but inaccurate, 28 out of 32, meaning his receivers had to make an adjustment. Uncatchable, just can't even catch it. Even if you're Kelvin Benjamin on steroids and you can jump as high as Odell Beckham and catch it with your fingertips, 30th out of 32. Not good, right? Behind the line of scrimmage, he was plus 6.9% versus the league, but every other bucket, short, minus 6.2% accuracy. Intermediate, minus 13% accuracy. Deep, minus 12% accuracy. Now, he did throw to open targets, minus 3% versus the league average. Not like his receivers or his scheme did him much of any kind of favors, like the ones
so
that we're probably
he sucks.
See. Yeah, he sucks. He threw to tight coverage, 2% more than the league average. His receivers were tightly covered. So One thing you can hope is that just DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson are better, right, than what he had at receivers, and that the scheme from Joe Brady is better. The one positive I saw is he is willing to push the ball further down the field, right, than what Teddy. Check down Teddy, loved going underneath. How could we have ever thought that that would be Robbie Anderson? Last year we said that DJ Moore would be underneath, right, and he would be taking the Mike Thomas role. No, Robbie Anderson, 170-pound Robbie Anderson, took the 215-pound Mike Thomas role, running inside against linebackers and safeties. Go figure, right? And DJ Moore became the intermediate / deep threat. So if the scheme stays the way it is, right, and they deployed that last year, I would assume that's going to be the same. I think DJ Moore gets a slight bump just because I think, Darnold is going to be a little more willing to push it down the field than what we saw with Teddy. Teddy wasn't terrible down the field, wasn't good, but he just didn't want to do it. It freaks Teddy out, right, to look deep. So, or look intermediate too much. But in those two categories, DJ Moore soundly, beat Robbie Anderson. Robbie Anderson soundly beat DJ Moore in the targets in the 1 to 9 yard range and the behind the line of scrimmage passes. So I think they're going to both be viable. Robbie Anderson is obviously the cheaper of the two, so I have no problem with taking Anderson. But I am going to own some DJ Moore shares, especially at his price. DJ Moore, the thing is 2.23 and 2.03 yards per route ran over the last 2 seasons. So even with Teddy Bridgewater, you couldn't hold him down. He saw 22% of the targets last year if you adjust for the time he missed. But his average depth of target jumped to 13.7. So catch rate dropped some because his ADOT went up. He had been at like 70%. It dropped to right around like 58 last year. But man, 18 yards a catch last year, Drake. So, that was definitely – DJ Moore was hanging in there, if you – shored up your roster in other ways, because we were taking him too early. He was hanging in there to give you wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 production. He wasn't giving you the wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2 production, right, that we advise people to draft him for. And we just had the roles backwards, and sometimes that happens, right? DJ Moore just made more sense than the Robbie Anderson role. But it is what it is, and so that could be a potential part. That could be some potential upside for DJ Moore. Darnold over the last 2 years has targeted the intermediate area of the field 3 to 5% more on average than Bridgewater, and he's targeted the deep receiver 1 to 3% more. So you're looking at anywhere from 4 to 8% not going short or to the behind the line of scrimmage receiver, but going to the intermediate and deep receiver, and that's going to favor DJ Moore. So again, not a receiver that I want as my wide receiver 2, but I really like DJ Moore still as my wide receiver 3, Drake. I love him if for some reason he's your wide receiver 4. If you're going with like a modified RB and you start off with a back and you come back with 4 receivers or something like that, and DJ Moore is your 4th and you get to start all 4. Yeah, I really like DJ Moore, in that scenario. So like in summary, I could even use him as a wide receiver 2 if I had to, if I'm building out a certain roster construction where you've got like 2 flex backs that you can use, something like that. In that case, I'm fine with Moore as my wide receiver 2. And here's the thing I will say, Drake, I won't be surprised if DJ Moore this year all of a sudden comes up at 25% of the targets. Like it won't surprise me because he's just still he's young. He's really a good player. He overcame adversity last year, even though they changed his role to still be at least, decent. He wasn't what we wanted him to be. But I like the talent. He still took 40% of the end zone target share. So there's still a lot of positives, right, around DJ Moore. And the price tag is not bad.
Absolutely. DJ Moore is still only, 24 years old, entering his 4th season in the NFL. So a lot of meat on the bone left for DJ Moore. And we think you guys got a lot of meat on the bone today. And before we get out of here, we had one last question. Is there a Panther tight end that could be relevant, Dwain?
No.
There you go. That's all you need to hear. Folks, we appreciate it.
People say Dan Arnold, right? Like that's what people want to go to. So if he I don't think he's going to take over the regular tight end duties is his problem. So I think what that means is they've either got to run more 12 personnel or he's got to run in the slot, which right now, it'll depend on what does Terrace Marshall do. So if he can pick up the majority of the slot work and it doesn't turn into a rotation, which is what my guess is, you're going to see him out there sometimes. You're going to see Marshall out there sometimes. You're going to see David Moore, who they picked up in free agency out there sometimes when they're in 3 wide receiver sets. And I think that just makes Dan Arnold shaky. If you're drafting a super deep league and you're like, I got to have a waiver with my last pick. I mean, in that case, fine if you want to make it, Dan Arnold, but I'm not holding out a lot of hope.
And I want to correct myself. Teddy supported 2 top 27 receivers. Robbie Anderson was 27th last year. Yep. Hey, I know some Jack Wagon will tweet at me or whatever. But folks, what a great show. A lot of good stuff here. Getting through the early part of the alphabet of the NFL. If you can kind of see how we're doing things here on the Hustle, we'll be back next week. May have a very special guest. We'll tweet that out. Follow us at FF Hustle. We'll let you know if we can secure the rights to this young man. But for Dwain, I am Brian. We appreciate it, everybody. Have fun, stay cool, and never